Located in the northwest of Ireland, on the banks of the Foyle, is one of the oldest human settlements in Ireland, and it's also the second largest city in Ulster. When the visitor reaches the city, the first thing they will discover is that the place has two names. They may be confused or amused, but we have many more than two. Starting with the first, we have Calga, an ancient Irish name for the hill. We also have Derry, which is also Irish, which means small hill or oak grove. And then we have Derry Columba. This was named after the saint Columba in the 6th century. And then we have Derry, which is the anglicised version of Derry. This was widely used under the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Then under a charter of King James, we have Londonderry, which expresses the link between the two cities of London and Derry. In fact, Derry is the only city that is twinned with London to this day. So while we have a list of official names, there's also a list of unofficial names, like Maiden City, Stroke City, Walled City, and the most recent one is Legendary. Yet despite the differences over the name, the city is held in great affection by all those who live here. Both the tourist and the visitor will soon discover that they're very welcomed. So as Shakespeare said, "I rose be any other name, would still smell as sweet." The city of Derry is the home of what is probably the finest collection of stained glass windows throughout Ireland. Stained glass as an art form is often associated more with churches, when they were often used to illustrate biblical stories. Stained glass has fascinated generations of viewers for centuries. A largely illiterate population would marvel at watching the sunlight illuminating the building with coloured light. This would breathe life into the figures and the stories depicted in the frame. They were an inspiration to prayer. Sometimes modern viewers can only see with prejudice. This prevents the viewer from enjoying the artist's intention. Seeing comes before words, and the child looks and marvels at the colour and form long before it can speak. Often the way we see things is affected by what we know or what we believe as adults. And if we the viewers can see beyond prejudice, it's possible to admire the skill of the artist, who fully understands the texture, colour and the light value of glass. The artist also needs to appreciate how their designs enhance the building within which their work is displayed. Then the building becomes a living art gallery. The content and the context of each picture is valued by the viewer, as every picture tells a story. Remember, even a family photograph is a composition as designed by the photographer, who wishes to reveal what he sees to the world. Then, when we appreciate that, we will understand how the artist and sponsor has developed an image of events and the stories within as they see them. Then the viewer is better placed to see beyond prejudice. To enjoy the experience of coloured light, the viewer must ensure that they are within the building, that the picture can only be seen on the inside. So we will visit the Guildhall, St Eugenius Cathedral, St Columba's Cathedral and the Long Tower, and enjoy the stories of the two founding fathers of this city, namely Columba and Sir Henry Docwra. St Columba is the only pre-Reformation saint whose image is displayed in stained glass across the many churches in the city. Held in high esteem for centuries, his name is associated with schools and streets, hospitals and churches throughout Ireland and beyond, but in particular in Donegal, Tyrone and here in Derry. He is a fascinating mixture of myth, fact and fiction, and that's what's so interesting about the man. Born in Garton in Donegal in the year 521, descendant of Niall of the Nine Hostages, who was an ancient king of Ireland. In fact, he was prophesied by St Patrick that there will be an evangelist who will make a great contribution to the church. A charismatic man and intellectually gifted, he was burdened with a fierce temper and an uncontrollable rage. This could be a constant challenge throughout his whole life. It is said that he studied under St Finnegan of Moville, County Down, who quickly realised his ability to learn and his devout commitment to prayer. And Columba was also under the supervision of a bard, who was called Raymond. He taught him the art of politics, Celtic folklore, and the engaging subject of power. He learned to respect the kings, the druids, the bards, and of course the Christian church. The gifts of diplomacy would continue to develop under his lifetime, and his ability to negotiate with warring factions would earn him the title the Dove of the Church. He was a deacon by the age of 20, and he was an ordained priest by the age of 25, and he was the founder of his abbey in Derry, Columba, by the time he was 26. This place is now known as Derry or Londonderry. Choosing Derry, Columba, an island at that time, would have been common practice within the early Christian church. And over the next 10 or 15 years, the monastery would establish itself as a seat of learning, a modern-day university. A prolific scribe, his passion and devotion to prayerful life was to transcribe in the Bible. He was acutely aware of the shortage of books. He knew that the growing church needed to spread the word of God and the readings as explained in the manuscript. So what was monastic life like in the 6th century Ireland? It was characterised by private prayer, private contemplation, and communal prayer. This was only interrupted by manual work, sleep, and study. One of the major preoccupations of monastic life was the writing of books, similar to the Book of Kells. In fact, there is some evidence that the Book of Derry was written in Derry. What the monks brought to the page was the vibrant colours, the artistic expression of the word, both reverent and comic. These books captivated their audience. The people, both druids and Picts, were in awe and were enthralled by them. And it was these books that were carried across Europe to introduce the new Christian religion to the pagans and druids. His mentor and teacher, St Finnegan, returned to Ireland with a Latin transcript of the Bible as written by St Jerome. While the book was revered and displayed, Finnegan did not grant Columba permission to copy the manuscript, and when he discovered that he had been doing so without his permission, he was angered by the breach of trust. The mentor and the student's friendship was going to be seriously challenged. Finnegan insisted that the copybook, when completed, should be returned to him. When Columba refused, the matter was referred to King Dermot, and the matter was to be settled in court. Columba, with typical zeal, believed he was acting for the greater good of the church, and was confident of victory. It had been the practice at that time that a copy of a book would be called a child book. Therefore, whoever owned the original or parent book also owned the copy. It is in that context that the verdict of King Dermot is no surprise. To every cow is calf, and to every book is copy. This is a famous forerunner to the copyright law. The child book, therefore, belonged to St Finnegan. At a stroke, Columba's ambitious plans for spreading the word of God by writing manuscripts was halted. Furious that his integrity was now publicly damaged, he cursed King Dermot before he left the court. However, it would be naive in the extreme to think that this verdict was only about a book. It is widely believed that the Druid religion, which was prevalent across Ireland, was beginning to lose its influence to the growing new religion of Christianity. Columba was the new kid on the block, and he attracted resentment and jealousy from his political opponents, and it was for that reason that he had to be halted. This is the background to the forthcoming battle, which resulted in victory for Columba. However, the Dove of the Church was now burdened with the death of hundreds, and he lost the support of his fellow religious. There are several stained glass windows that depict his departure, waving farewell to the faithful friends and followers. He heads down the River Foyle in a curragh. A curragh is an ancient boat with a wooden frame which is wrapped in cowhide to keep it waterproof. Rowing as far as Moville, Donegal, he stepped ashore at Port Kill, where he looked back with a broken heart to see his home which he was leaving for the last time. Severed from his relationships, both religious and political, broken by exile, and at 42, Columba and his followers are heading for the open sea, Scotland. His journey from sinner to sainthood would begin. Facing the open sea. These were men of faith, and whatever challenges they would face by way of storm or even death, they would undertake them for the love of God. It is certainly true to say that there's a legacy of prayer left by Columba within the city. But is it also fair to say that he has shaped the city as we now know it? He made a contribution to the spiritual dimension of it, but the physical development of the city belongs to a second name. His name is Sir Henry Docwra. We know that Queen Elizabeth sent Sir Henry Docwra over in May 1600 to establish a position in the Foyle. He chose the hill of Derry, even though it was in the stronghold of O'Donnell country. But he chose it for a different reason than Columba. He chose it because of his military defence, not as a place of prayer. Docwra is certainly not as well known as Columba. However, his profile is well worth exploring, and what emerges after some research is that he was a professional soldier, but he was also an amazing survivor. There is no known image of Docwra, except the one that we have in the Guildhall, which is only an artist's impression. This is a fact in itself that's interesting, since it was the custom among the military gentry to have their portraits painted in oil, particularly after military successes. So was Docwra a modest man? Perhaps. Born on the 30th of April 1564 into a military family in Yorkshire, he was destined to become a professional soldier. While growing up, he was active in blood sports, learning the skills of horsemanship and sword. This was all within the family tradition. While in France, Italy and Spain they had military academies, Docwra learnt his skills in the field. He fought in the Netherlands as an apprentice in arms, serving with his father's company. He also served under Sir Richard Bingham in Ireland, largely in Connaught. Such was the severity of Bingham's tactics against the Mayo Burkes that the Queen had him imprisoned for insubordination. He has been described as pragmatic, preferring to divide the enemy and persuading them to kill each other. When the Earl of Essex was invited by Queen Elizabeth I to assemble an army to have yet another go at quelling the Irish, he was delighted to have been accepted. He was then invited to arrange the transport of veteran troops from the lowlands to Ireland. Docwra was now in his early 30s and he had many campaigns under his belt, but there was no sign of a family life. While he served in these campaigns, he did rise rapidly through the ranks. And under the Earl of Essex, once again, he took up a position of authority. However, Essex's campaign was going too slow. Queen Elizabeth and her court got impatient. It was taking far too long to reach O'Neill and O'Donnell in the north. However, when he did, the Earl of Essex made a crucial mistake. They formed a truce. He abandoned his campaign and headed for England. Queen Elizabeth was furious. To trust this traitor upon an oath is to trust the devil upon his religion. He was actually executed on Ash Wednesday, the 5th of February 1601. The amazing thing is, Docwra survived, despite being one of the favourites of Essex. Under the command of Lord Mountjoy, he was to raise an army of 4,000 for the Foyle. Because the Fort Foyle in Derry struck such fear into the hearts of the new recruits, this proved to be a very difficult task. It was commonly said at the time, it was better to be hanged at home than die like dogs in Ireland. Despite all these challenges, he did arrive in Cumore in May 1600. Having established a position in the Columba, he left 700 men and then marched on to Derry. Docwra described Derry as a place in the manner of an island, which had about 40 acres on it. There were nothing there but only ruins of an abbey, a bishop's home, 2 churches and an old castle. He also said, "It lies in the form of a bow bent, whereas in the bog is the string and the river is the bow." Docwra established his fort in this area here in 1600. He was keen to set up his defences of earth and timber because he was now in hostile country of O'Donnell. A closer look at the map will help us understand what it all looks like. This map is dated 1600 and is the first pictorial evidence of Docwra being located on the hill of Derry. Overlooking the bog side and using the hill and the bog as a defence against a possible Irish land attack, it's easy to see why he took up this position. Ships were moored on the river, providing protection from the east bank. And to the right, the wooden area of the water side provided cover for the Irish snipers. 3 ends are an indication of the 3 entries to the fort. At the foot of the hill are the wells, using the letter P, today known as St Columba's Wells. In the centre is the letter H, which indicates the location of the hospital, which is probably the first field hospital ever set up in Ireland. Docwra did have a genuine concern for those who served under him, and their welfare was important to him. K, to the right of the page, is a needle tower, evidence of a former monastic community that also used the hill. This is a second map, drawn up 1 year later in 1601, and it is much greater detail. At a glance, it's clear to see that there are more buildings within the fort, indication of a lot of building activity, and the hospital, which has been relocated beyond the fort. The Irish had by and large left the English alone, and progress was clearly visible. An army in the 1600 would have been subject to camp disease because of poor hygiene. It was also reported in the annals of the Four Masters that the English forces were afraid to go outside, largely due to the Irish snipers. So every stick and brick that was gathered was largely fought for. And the Irish logic of leaving the English to the weather did prove to be very effective, because his forces were dying daily. However, Docwra's despair soon turned to hope. Docwra did win over some Irish support, namely Arthur O'Neill of Donegal, having been promised the Lordship of Tyrone. Niall O'Donnell took the English side, having been promised the Lordship of Donegal, and Catherine Doherty of Inishowen supported Docwra with intelligence report, horses, fish, cattle and other services. Docwra exploited the rivalry that existed between the Irish clans. Indeed, he was very shrewd politically, again proving himself to be a survivor, and above all, a pragmatic professional soldier. Having established his forts between Burt and Carrigans, he succeeded in dividing O'Neill and O'Donnell, and the scorched earth policies they were pursuing, that is, destroying all crops, and created the deprivation and starvation across Ulster, reducing the population to eating grass in their attempt to live. By 1603, the O'Neill and the O'Donnell resistance had collapsed. Docwra freely admitted that without the support of his Irish allies, which was essential for his successful campaign, however, his peers Mountjoy and Chichester were very suspicious of his Irish friends. Why were the English in Ireland anyway? Firstly, its rich natural resources of timber and fish and cattle and land, and its convenient location to London would help support the booming population. Secondly, the fear of attack from Spain, using Ireland as a backdoor. Given that the Spanish had landed in Kinsale in 1601, there was no need of further proof of a Spanish alliance with Ireland. Queen Elizabeth was determined to conquer Ulster and include her realm of entire Ireland within her kingdom. However, the 9-Year War was very costly. King James invited O'Neill to London. Docwra wrote at the time, I have lived to see that damnable Tyrone brought to England, honoured and well liked. How did I labour after that Neve's destruction? I ventured perils by land and sea, was near starvation. His rage is based on the fact that the lands of Tyrone and Donegal were returned to O'Neill and O'Donnell, having signed a treaty submitting to the Queen's authority, and unknown to O'Neill at the time, Queen Elizabeth had been dead for 7 days on the 24th of March. Having signed, he was now the Earl of Tyrone in the English manner. Docwra now had a dilemma. How was he able to keep his promise to the Irish clan chieftains who had fought with him? Unable to keep his word, he grew more and more disillusioned. Despite being a soldier of fortune, he was also a man of principle. A charter was issued by King James in July 1604, and it clearly stated that the town or borough of Derry is, by reason of a natural seat and situation thereof, a place very convenient and fit to be made both a town of war and a town of merchandise. It continued, if the same were not only walled, entrenched and inhabited, but also incorporated and endowed with convenient liberties and privileges. As Dr. William Kelly highlighted the fact that the establishment of a garrison at Derry gave some measure of protection and confidence to the new settlers who arrived during the plantation. After Docwra, the English stayed. Docwra himself left Derry, having sold off his original lands for less than they were valued. He returned to England to lead a quiet life, married and had 5 children. Returning to Ireland as Treasurer of War in 1616, he served on the post until his death in 1631. Richard Boyle, Earl of Cork, is quoted as saying, "He served long and died poor." He was a soldier of fortune, but he died without a fortune. Both Columba and Henry Docwra have presented past generations with a conflict of loyalty. Some supported the saint, others a soldier, arguing that he was the sole founder of the city of Derry. Might I suggest that both have many similarities? Both were men of principle, wishing to keep their word. Both were scribes, fond of the written word. Both were honest brokers in their own chosen profession. And both left Derry suffering rejection. Both died in relative poverty, and both lived on the hill of Derry and left considerable legacies, despite being 1,000 years apart. If we wish to enjoy the shared future of this city, we really should acknowledge the shared contribution of both these giant personalities. St. Columba, the saint, and Sir Henry Docwra, the soldier.